Thank you, Ina and Alessi, for having me. Let me just share my screen so we can start the presentation. Okay. Hello, everyone. The presentation I brought for us to discuss, to talk about it, it's more the data and information I put together for a book that was recently published by Springer, and it's about regional fisheries management organizations. And the idea of the book was to discuss how power and knowledge are interplay, if they are listening to each other, if that guarantee more effectiveness for the agreements. And I explored this topic in 3 different RFMOs, and this is what I'm going to tell you a little bit. So most of you knows, and we have been following these Miracle Data seminars, that ocean governance is a big alphabet soup. We have so many international organizations, agreements that are part of this big United Nations Convention Law of the Sea umbrella. Some of them are more related to resource and extraction and usage, and others are more related to the conservation and scientific research. But all of them have some connection or interplay in this ocean helm that we are all observing, and that regulate behaviors and activities in our ocean. So I choose to study the regional fishery management organizations because I consider that, as my background was on biology, and I was doing research on international relations, my idea was to see if all those rules, agreements, policies, programs we have to regulate ocean activities were somehow guaranteeing more effectiveness in terms of recover or maintenance the biomass or the stocks population. So the regional fishery management organizations came up with as a way to discuss that topic, because we could measure if the stocks or the fish stocks populations were increasing or decreasing depending on such variables. So the RFMOs, as most of you know, they exist to solve the problems of overexploitation of fisheries, and they do it collectively because there are so many species that migrate among the ocean. So it doesn't matter if for instance, Brazil set up a set of regulation to protect tuna. If the tuna migrates to South Africa, for instance, and then in South Africa, we don't have any regulation. So all those fish stocks that migrate over countries are natural common resource that should be protected or regulated under some collective agreement. So this RFMOs work as a forum where the member states can agree and discussing binding or non-binding rules for conservation and management of fishery resources. The RFMOs exist already in a while, since 1949, that was the first one. And currently we have more than 18 across the ocean. So I would say that all oceans have some sort of regulating mechanism for fisheries, and it includes the great world powers in those organizations. It has a great body of knowledge on RFMOs from different perspectives, exploring different dimensions, and many authors agree that they have not been fully effective in promoting the maintenance and conservation of fish stocks. So we have some authors that point to some direction on how those RFMOs could be more effective to protect the fish stocks. And there's one paper from Christine Gerd in 2013 that she points that what could prevent fishery agreements from being more effective. And she has a set of dimensions that could improve the member states' behavior on these RFMOs. One of them was they normally seek for short-term gains. And when we establish a certain regulation, the nature have her own time to respond to that regulation. So member states should plan for long-term gains and not short-term as they normally see. The lack of compliance with rules and penalties. So we have different countries from the global north to the global south. They all have different capabilities of comply with those regulations. So we have also the lack of compliance. The mobility of fishing fleets. So the vessels can fish a research to local extinction and then change the fishing location. So we normally have to create rules that are adaptive, so we can move around as the nature also change. Also, another problem that she pointed out in this paper is that the most RFMOs make decisions by consensus, and that creates a perverse incentive not to reach fishery agreements that are really ambitious or robust. So any agreement will limit this freedom to fish, and most of member states are have concerns or are afraid of it. We also know that, like, United Nations Convention of the Sea and the United Nations Fishery Stocks Agreements are always claiming or always demanding that the decisions should be made on the basis of best available scientific information. But we also know that in practice, science is not often heard in policy decisions. So what I was trying to do is to select some case studies to test if when those member states were listening to science, if that would improve the effectiveness of those agreements in terms of recover and conserving fish stocks, because probably most of you know there are many different ways, and it's very complex to measure effectiveness of an agreement. So I just pick one that would, if this agreement listen or not listen to power, if that was recovering or at least maintaining the fish stocks of a certain population. That was the way I decided to frame my research. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there are more than 18 RFMOs. So I picked 3. I got the Commission for Conservation of Southern Bluefin Tuna that stay, I don't know if you see, probably you don't see my pointer, but that stay in the south part in the ocean. I came to the Commission for Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, the CCAMLR, that is for the Antarctic area, and ICCAT, which is the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tunas. The main goal here was not doing any comparative studies, because those agreements differ greatly amongst each other. But the idea was to see if there were a pattern, or if highlighting some of their differences and highlighting some of their characteristics, we could see if the power were listening to science. And why did I pick up those 3? So I based my choices on this paper from 2010, and now it sounds quite old, more than 10 years, but this has been a very long research, and I started the research in 2012 to compile some data. So at that time it was not 10 years old, this paper. And in this paper, Daniel Pauly and Colin Suzuki, they made a test, some key score, to discuss and to point the effectiveness of those agreements regarding the point I was looking for. That was the biomass recovery. And CCAMLR got 100% score. ICCAT was like in the middle of it, and CCSBT was 0 score. So I picked those 3 because I would like to see if the effectiveness Daniel Pauly and Colin Suzuki were measuring were somehow related to any institutional design or any other institutional characteristics that could play a role in this effectiveness that they were measuring. So I got CCAMLR, ICCAT, and CCSBT as an example to see how their institutional design were working or not working to recover or maintain the fish stocks population. Then what's the theory I use it? So this work comes with comes from the international relation theory, and they choose the epistemic communities because epistemic communities is part of this constructivist shift in international relations that is going on and on since the 80s. One of the main references, Professor Peter Hess from the University of Massachusetts, which I had the pleasure to spend a year on, discussing this theory and looking at some sort of variables that could play or could help epistemic communities really influence the policy decisions. And that theory really discussed what are the differences and how material and ideational factors play a role at the moment the decision makers are making any decision. So this comes with a pragmatic constructivist of this professor, Peter Hess, and they discuss basically how the ideas and knowledge are influencing the way identities are constituted. So how actors, agents define their interests in terms of the ideas, in terms of what they have known or what they have learned. Did social learning play any role in this decision? Do they come with some previous idea on how they will shape their decisions or how the ideas will shape their interests? And for this theory, their interest depends on how they define themselves in relation to other actors, or how together they learn about something, they learn about one specific topic, and how they move forward collectively with this decision. And RFMOs seems a really key space or key arena to promote learning, because it's a very technical issue. When they have to decide the TAC, the total allowable catch, they need to rely on some technical information about the fish stocks. So they need to rely on knowledge to take their decisions, even when they recognize, and I recognize in this work as well, power and interests plays a big role as well. But knowledge also plays, because they need to rely on some technical information to decide how they will regulate certain fish stocks. So RFMO seems a really good place to test this framework, to test this theoretical approach, to see if the ideas were really influencing somehow the policy-making decisions. How Peter Hess has in 1992 and then in a book in 2015 defined the epistemic community, because epistemic community is not a simple scientific community that we look and say, oh, those are the group of scientists. Oh, okay, they are the epistemic communities. No, there are certain characteristics that this group has to keep or has to identify themselves to be classified as epistemic communities. And Professor Peter Hess has also defined some methods that you have to use to set a boundary on who is part of this epistemic community and where this epistemic community is within an agreement or within a decision-making arena. And the four main characteristics of this epistemic community concept is that normally this group of knowledge holders, they have this set of normative beliefs and principles, which provide like a rationale for their advice. So when they provide an advice for a decision-making process, they are always basing their evaluation on the rationale, on these members, on how they share their casual beliefs. So casual belief is the second characteristic. So this group of scientists has to have some basis and acceptance for some casual relationship for those specific topics. So they have to identify a core set of problems, and they need to share notions of validation. So if you have a group of scientists that is always meeting, always discussing the same topic, always together adjusting the methods or discussing how they change, how they adjust, how they change the methods, how they change the statistic or the data, how they improve the data quality, how they reduce uncertainty. They create a certain bond amongst themselves that allows them to have a common policy enterprise. They set a common practices because together they develop certain social learn experience amongst themselves that make them then as a core group that have the same identity, the same methods, the same beliefs. So they are more robust in terms of group of scientists that share and advocate for the same idea. And it is epistemic community comes with this international organization special issue from 1992. And they have tested this approach for ozone debate, whales, pollution in the Mediterranean, food aid in the Anglo-American post-war. And since 1992, other researchers have applied and tested this concept for an array of different subjects, and the concept has evolved in different topics. So fisheries was not one of the main topics, so at that time I decided to use RFMOs to advance the theory here. One of the things I compared using lots of documentation from those CCSBT, ICCAT, and CCAMLR was to get all the documentation to process tracing how the decisions were taken. But before evaluating how the decisions were taken, I got the institutional design of the agreement to understand how those decisions were making. And one of the things that the theory lends to that empirical data is that the social learn among the groups, the decision makers, the scientists, epistemic communities, civil societies, that if the social learning is greater or if the social learning increases, it also depends on the regime design. So how this agreement is built, how the institutional design of that agreement plays a role to improve the social learning. Because if we have a better social learning, if we have social learning space in this agreement, then maybe it depends on the regime design. So there are certain characteristics that it needs to be highlighted here. One of them is to create a permanent and interdisciplinary scientific papers or commission to address specific topics. So the way the agreement select, or the way the rules are designed to select the scientific panels is really important here. To create and entrust separate subcommittees responsible for different functions. So we have one committee for research, monitoring, policy assessment, verification. It allows you to have experts on different areas and that they can connect and interact amongst themselves. It's very difficult to have just one scientific panel specific for one agreement when this agreement needs to deal or to take care of different issues or different topics. So carefully seek out scientists to identify a core group that shares casual values and beliefs. And sometimes this is difficult because most scientists are indicated by the government. So there's a very big influence from states on the scientist choice. Ensure that panels have cross-disciplinary representation, including social science, natural science, and that all individuals are highly regarded their own discipline. So they are experts in the area and not just political indicated, but not really on the field. Recruit national and regional institutions based on professional credentials and networking capacity. So how one science expert can also be representing certain topic, but is very well connected that can also get the knowledge from national scientists and be the voice at the international agreement. And also avoid relying on national institution to provide or to sponsor research and training. So those kind of characteristics could help to improve the social learning. And by improving social learning, we also have more effectiveness within the agreements. So when we look specifically to each agreement, we have CCAMLR, and CCAMLR really has the best institutional design for science. Since CCAMLR was created, it has a direct flow that allows science and epistemic community to produce knowledge and influence policy decisions. This is even written in the constitution of CCAMLR. However, in most decisions that I have pulled some data from, we can see that the scientific community is yet not speaking with a single voice in some specific points. So the dissonance and lack of consensus is preventing an even greater level of efficiency or effectiveness. And this is normally because if you have a scientific community or epistemic community that has disagreements over one scientific advice, the decision makers also have difficulty to decide which way they go. So if the consensus is made a little bit before the decision-making process, but on the scientific panels, on the scientific meetings, it's easier to promote change on the decision-making process. CCAMLR also faces this identity crisis. And for I did so many interviews with decision makers and state delegates and also scientists that were attending CCAMLR at that time. And most of them were not really sure if CCAMLR should be an RFMO, because the history of CCAMLR really differs from most of RFMOs. CCAMLR was created within this Antarctic treaty system. So the way it was created, it's red in the orange, an institution that was created to promote conservation. Different from ICCAT, for instance. The ICCAT was more created to regulate fishery. So the way CCAMLR comes and was created and developed by the state members already differs from the others. So they were, since at the beginning, taking precautionary principle, ecosystem approach, and that was not the same for other FRMOs. There is now, since 5 years ago, or even more, I guess 6, 7 years ago, a process that is taking precautionary principle ecosystem approach to the RFMOs, but CCAMLR was born into this identity. So it really differs from the others. So many people that I talked at in interview at that time, they were not really sure if RFMO would be considered CCAMLR as one RFMO or not. So I got one specific case on Patagonian toothfish. Patagonian toothfish, it's a high-valued fishery resource. It's very economical, important for different countries. Some of them called in the white gold. And CCAMLR members grew increasingly concerned as the toothfish have a long lifespan, late sexual maturity, low fertility. So they are very vulnerable to overexploitation. So the decision-making process to conserve and to maintain the toothfish population need to be taken very carefully. So despite CCAMLR's attempts to implement management measures, the high market value of fishery and the remoteness of these fishing grounds make the process to protect the toothfish really hard. So during the time I did this research, so it was a 10 years monitoring following the scientific advice and the decision-making process. When there was a scientific consensus in the scientific group, the advice was mostly accepted, was mostly taken by the plenary. So what we come here is that this CCAMLR has the commission where the political decisions are taken and the scientific committee. And this working group of ecosystem monitoring and management, they play a big role on this Patagonian toothfish decision-making process. And when they come with a decision along this 10 years of research, so from 2004 and 2014, you can see that the management advice was along those 10 years mostly taken. So like here in 2005, the management advice was 3556, and the decision-making process got 3050 TAC recommendation. So the management advice along those 10 years was practically the same. So it shows that the decision-making process is taking the scientific advice very seriously. You're going to see later on that for many others, or the 2 others that I have studied, are not like that. So just shows that science is really playing a role here at CCAMLR. However, along those 10 years, other report meetings shows as well that CCAMLR is getting closer and closer, to ROP is the acronym in Portuguese, but it's to our RFMO. Why? Because the balance between the fishing and no fishing countries is now getting more fishing interest than before. So at the beginning, most of countries that were taking decisions were more pro-conservation, or were oriented more into the conservation than it's now. So you have an increasing in the number of countries that are members that have no traditional connection with the ATS, the Antarctic Treaty System, and the increasing tendency for CCAMLR members to be represented at Commission. So you look at the delegation and you see that now you have more Ministry of Fisheries rather than the Foreign Affairs or Environmental Ministry. And also what make them a little bit closer to other RFMOs is that the other RFMOs are now also considering precautionary principles, ecosystem approach. So they're more getting more homogeneous amongst themselves. When we look at the ICCAT, the institutional design is very different from CCAMLR. Even more because we have more countries that are part of ICCAT than CCAMLR. But the institutional design is not designed to encourage the production of scientific knowledge in isolation from politics. So there's a huge policy influence on the species management, even within the scientific, the ICCRS, which is the Scientific Research Scientific Committee. ICCAT has been growing as a commission, so we have 48 members in 2014. That was the time I was doing my research. And in this case, I explored the bluefin tuna, which, similar to the Patagonian toothfish, is a very economical key species for many different countries. So it's considered a very important fish stock to be protected or to be fished. So there is this conflict between the countries who have a big interest on fishing the bluefin tuna and others that have no. And if you look at this 10 years process tracing, you see that these black dots shows that this is the scientific advice that comes from the ICCRS, the scientific panel for ICCAT. And here you see the commission decision. So from 2004 to 2010, 2011, basically, you can see that the scientific advice was, oh, you can take around 15,000 tons of bluefin tuna, but the decision at the end was much bigger. Actually, it was the double of it. So they were not taking the scientific advice from their own panel seriously, because they were always doubling the size of the quota that they could fish out from the sea. And that really changes in 2011. So that was interesting to see. So I process tracing all the documents that came to this point to understand why they have changed their position in 2011. Was the fish stocks almost going to extinction? Was there any pressure from civil society? How that happened? Because it was not how they were taking the process in the previous years. So what, I'm sorry, I had this presentation in English and Portuguese, and I guess here it has going the Portuguese version. But here you see that in the same 10 years, you have a number of NGOs attending ICCAT has increased. So it shows a civil society representation
and how the advocacy groups could really play a role on putting some pressure on member states. So you see the black bars shows how it has increasing not only in the plenary, which is the black bars, but also on the scientific community, because there are some scientists that are from civil society, are from environmental NGOs, but also has a scientific background and were allowed to be as well at the scientific committee. So when we process tracing all the documents and interview some stakeholders that were following this process, we can map a different context here at the ICCAT. The epistemic community here were not only constituted by the scientists or the scientists that were at the ICRS, they were also constituted by the science experts from NGOs that were also contributing to produce knowledge. And at that time was also part of this epistemic community, the ICCAT chairman, that by the time was a Brazilian researcher. And this group from some scientists from the scientific panel, the ICCAT chairman, and some NGOs, plus the CITES, the other agreement threat to the ICCAT, really put some pressure on at the COP, at the state members, ICCAT, CPCs, the contracting parties. So you see that the pressure from the other international organizations that say, hey, if you don't act, if you don't protect the bluefin tuna, we're gonna be listing the bluefin tuna in our list, and then you will not be able to catch any more fish. And the epistemic community were also putting some pressure on the CPCs, and all the knowledge they had really made an effect on the decision-making process. Also, it made a huge difference, and this we can see in the report meetings, statements, interviews, that the fact that the ICCAT chairman at that time was not only a decision maker or some delegate from a country, he was a scientist himself. So he had a good relationship with the scientific panel and a good relationship with the state members. So that helps to build a bridge among those two arenas. And that really made an effect. So if you see here, the ICCAT report from 2014, 2015, 4 or 5 years after the decision of following the scientific advisor were matched, we can see here on the top bottom at the SSB, which is the biomass of the bluefin tuna, it really has increased the biomass and the fish population. So it really made a difference to follow the scientific advice. When we look at the CCSBT, the Commission for the Southern Bluefin Tuna, we need to keep in mind that it's one of the newest RFMOs that we have in the planet. And it is a very new one, it has already followed some of the best practices, because our RFMOs have been subject to some evaluation process. So CCSBT was born already with those best practices. So they have a very different scientific committee, which is an excellent model that helped to improve the integrity of the agreements. They have access to highly competent national scientists. It's also a small agreement, so they have their area is smaller compared to the others. And they have an independent scientific panel that really differs from the others. However, the lack of transparency in the access and inclusion of documents still undermines the efficiency of the agreement, and even undermines the way of doing this research, because I could not have access to many information at that time. So what we have here, we have a very few members. So the members of the plenary, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Republic of Korea, the fishing entity of Taiwan and Indonesia, and we have some cooperating non-members. So when we compare that with ICCAT, which is more than 50 members, or even CCAMLR, which is 20 members, I guess, you see that the CCSBT is a very small in terms of members, small agreement. And the way they have designed themselves, it really differs. They create an independent advisory panel. They have 4 independent scientists that are
that are providing knowledge to the stock assessment groups and to the extended scientific committee. So the way knowledge comes into the CCSBT is not under a scientific panel that was chosen by the states and that is not really insulated from the policy process. So they have this independent advisory panel that really improves the effectiveness, as so the theory says. And then you have here the ICCSBT, which is the plenary of members. When we track the documents from these three scientists, and when we talk to them, we can see that they really work as epistemic communities themselves, because the methods the independent advisory panel uses, the way they share information, the way they agree on their results, on the scientific advice, really constituted them as a core member that shares some casual beliefs and that share some, they are more aligned on the methods and approach they use to provide the scientific advice. And when we see this, in addition, for CCSBT being the newest RFMO in this study, we can note they have a very well structured scientific panel, and that the epistemic community here only emerged in 2011, 2012, because before that, the agreement was quite new, that the scientists didn't know each other very well. So it took a while for them to create this cohesive group. And when the management procedure was adopted and the independent advisory panel was created, they could get more, they could get along more themselves, that made them to portray the scientific advice in one unique voice. So they trust the same methods, they trust the same results, and they agree on the advice they were sharing with the others, decision makers. So in a nutshell, what I was trying to answer here was is the power listening to science in the case, a specific case of these RFMOs. So yes, it could, but it depends on the strategy, on the allies, and the way that it happens differs in each case. It depends greatly on the institutional design of that agreement and on the actors that are going around the decision-making process here. So what I would like to highlight, so is that the role institutional design plays here that interfere greatly on how influential this scientific committee can be for policy decisions. CCAMLR is to present the best set of rules to ensure that knowledge can flow from an epistemic community to decision arena. ICCAT was known for not listening to science for a while, but in the case I assessed here, the Bluefin tuna, we could see signs of recovery in the eastern tuna, Bluefin tuna population, as we have civil society, scientists, all putting some pressures on the state members for making them to hear the scientific advice. CCSBT is still a very at the early stage, but also present an epistemic community, and that emerged when they created these management procedures that were built and developed to guarantee an independence of scientific opinion. And of course, I guess I would have to highlight here, if we have some international scholars, that I choose to have a focus and to use the approach of epistemic communities, but that do not exclude the central importance of interstate relations in the world affairs. So the variables and dimensions as power, interest still plays a big role on the decision-making process, but that does not exclude the non-state influence, the role of knowledge, because if we exclude knowledge and non-state actors, that would give us just a partial picture of international system. So yeah, I guess this is what I would like to share, and I would like to thank you, everyone that stay here, and thank you, Ina, for having me.
Thank you. Great, thanks, Leandra. So we have, as usual, a little bit of a discussion for the rest of the session. And I'll hand it over to you first. So if you have any questions, you can raise your hand. Feel free to provide your video also if your internet allows. You can post your question in the chat or raise your hand, or if you do not want to be identified, you can also have a private chat here because we're recording this session today for the first time. So yeah, but please feel free to have this as a safe space and informal discussions and ask any questions you would like to ask. So yeah, if anyone has, I have lots of questions, but I'll give it to you. I'll hand over to you first if there's anyone in the audience that has questions. So you can go first. I'll give you a minute to digest what we just heard. Lisa, great to see you again.
Hi, let me get my video on. Thank you for that really nice and interesting presentation. The Deep Ocean Observing Strategy is about to launch into a study of whether the RFMOs are using oceanographic data and information about changing conditions in the ocean, especially under climate change, but just what ocean data they actually use. And I was curious in your studies whether you came across any evidence that not just stock information, but oceanographic data became important to the decision making.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you very much for your question. Yes, it differs from one agreement to the other. But as I remember in CCAMLR and CCSBT, I don't recall on ICCAT, but I can check my data. They have some specific groups that were, for instance, discussing climate change impacts. And for that discussion, they use oceanographic data to base their decision. So they basically use all the oceanographic information to run their models, because those oceanographic information were really influence the way stocks were behaving or were increasing or decreasing, or those conditions have an effect on the population. So then they were looking at it. They were looking at some set of factors from the oceanographic data to base their decision-making process.
Thank you.
And they have some specific groups to discuss those kind of things. And then
that was CCAMLR, right?
Yeah.
The others?
I remember CCSBT had as well. I don't remember ICCAT, but I can check and I can send you a note later.
Perfect. Thanks for the question. And we have another question from Mariam.
Hello. Thank you for really interesting presentation, and it was really nice to follow how science affect on decision making process. But I have two questions. One is related to the topic and maybe another is not really, but I'm really curious and I want to ask it. So could you explain the procedure and the importance and how RMFOs are collaborating in knowledge sharing and data sharing process? Because while they are like working like independently within the format, the exchange of knowledge, exchange of data, like starting to getting important, not only for climate change issues, but also environmental issues, fishing issues, and so on and so on. So since the ocean matters are really connected, RMFOs plays like important role in how they are connected and collaborating with each other for knowledge sharing purposes. This is first question, and the second question is related to marine genetic resources. And here I'm just interested how RMFO can work on this matter and push ahead, or invite science to learn more and to develop the not like very fragmented regulation system, but the policy who really works on protection of marine environment, and on the other hand, exploration of marine genetic resources. Thank you so much, and sorry for taking long.
Thank you, Marianne. They're very interesting. Your first question is very interesting. They have different strategy to share and contribute with each other. So along my research, I guess I could see three main strategies. First of all, there are many state delegates and scientists that are not exclusive of one agreement. They attend different agreements. So many scientists that are normally attending the scientific panel at ICCAT, they are also attending CCAMLR. They are, this is difficult with the CCSBT because the CCSBT is very small and concentrating in a very unique region, but they normally have scientists that are attending more than one of these RFMOs. And as they go in these scientific meetings, they normally share experiences, best practices, lessons learned from each other agreement. And so the delegates do the same. So some delegates that are, like, for instance, in Brazil, because I know them better, they attend the ICCAT, they are the same for CCAMLR, they are the same for other agreements. So they also can share their best practices. So this is one thing. The other is that all RFMOs faced performance reviews. There was a process that RFMOs decide to go to, and through this performance reviews, they also could share some practices and understand how they were advancing on their progress. And the other one is through the civil society stakeholders, because some big NGOs that also follow ICCAT, follow also CCAMLR and other fishery agreements, so they also can share information among agreements and input some knowledge in the system. So I guess these three strategies help them to share what they learn and how they are advancing or how they are solving some problems. And the second question was regarding marine genetic resources. Was I don't know if I get your question, but was that if they are discussing genetic issues under the scientific panels? Was that your question?
Yes. What is the policy? How they react, and what are their position at the moment? Because marine genetic resources getting important matter within the BBNG agreement also, and there are different legal instruments regulating this matter differently. The law, from the law perspective, it's already very fragmented, but when it comes to the resources, RMFO also plays a very, very important role. And this is why I'm interested how they really understand and see this process and what could be their role to govern the genetic resources issues, because somehow if we're going to take UNCLOS, for example, into the mind, UNCLOS reacts on living and non-living resources, and like marine genetic resources are also resources, right? And it also might fall within the RMFO's activities. Therefore, what are their roles and how scientifics are engaged into this process? This was my concern, and thank you for your answers.
Unfortunately, I guess I'm not really prepared, or I really don't know the answer, because all the mapping and documental analysis I did for the RFMOs came a little bit before all this marine genetic research on BBNJ starting to getting more discussed. And as I was not looking at that, I didn't get this information from the documents, and this was not a topic I was approaching with the interviews. So I really don't have that information, but I would say I would just imagine that they are really discussing this topic, because one of the things that the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction is discussing now is marine genetic resources, and one of the topics that has been very key in this discussion is not to undermine existing agreements. So this has been a topic that must be discussed on RFMOs as well, but I'm not following this topic, and I have to apologize.
Thank you so much.
Perfect, thank you. Maybe we can also go into this discussion a little bit later on, you know, the interplay between new merging treaties and the existing ones already. But first we have another question by Roy.
Cool. Thanks very much. Thank you, Leandra, for an interesting and also an encouraging presentation. I like the way the guys for the Bluefin at least started following the science, and I presume you're talking about Fabio Hazim from Brazil trying to lead that process. He was an amazing guy. We're engaging across various RFMOs, and I'm getting more and more global oversight to see delegates and others fighting the same battles, just on different battlefields based on the structures of the RFMOs. And sometimes it's frustrating, but of course, lots of lessons learned between them. I'm trying to encourage more knowledge exchange, especially at the moment between IOTC and ICCAT, as they start talking about allocation equity and driving that process. So they go into those discussions with their eyes open, especially working with the West Africans, which is an interesting case there. I don't know if you've dealt at all with the fish aggregating device negotiations. Like, we are knee deep in those, right in the scrum, helping all sorts of coastal state delegates. And it would be excellent if we could just have a chat about that sometime. I can give you our perspective on it and see, there's issues there where the EU in particular is, they're not transparent in their operations. They're not providing the data, but calling for a science-based approach and really pushing back against precautionary approach being, the alternative. So it's like a really interesting interplay there. And I would love to kind of discuss it further with you and see if it's something that would be of interest to you to follow up with, and work out how to kind of have more impact together. So I'll drop my email in the chat, and let's make a plan.
Sure, thank you, Roy. Let's chat about it. It's ICCAT and others RFMOs. It's as other agreements, it's lots of documents. So during my research, I had to decide which way or which variables dimensions I was looking at. So the fishery aggregation device, I did not focus, but I would love to discuss it further and see if we can explore a little bit more. I can check my data interviews if someone has mentioned something like that, or some information regarding FAD. And yes, Fabio Hazim, we really miss. He was a very important but key person for me, and he did a great job at the RFMOs.
He was incredible. Yeah, he was really amazing. So let's chat. FADs, it would be a great case study. It's kind of the crux of the matter on various issues, including yellowfin stock conditions in the IOTC. So anytime when you're free, just let me know times and we'll get together. It'd be great.
I will send you an email. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks. I'm happy to see we are connecting the group a little bit. There's another question that reached me in the chat, which says, how is the interaction between RFMOs, or those you studied, with the ISA, so the International Seabed Authority, in terms of competing spatial interests or information sharing or any other aspect you could think of? I can post it, I guess.
Ina, sorry, your voice broke a little bit. I couldn't hear. Can you repeat, please?
Yes. So I'm going to post it in the chat as well. So basically the question was on the interaction between RFMOs and the ISA, so the International Seabed Authority, in terms of spatial interests, information sharing, or other aspects you can think of.
I'm not really sure if they have great interaction, but I recall when I was tracking the participant lists, And this is also something regarding Marian's question. We always had some others, international organization representatives following each other agreements. So FAO, CCSBT secretary or chair was at the ICCAT, ICCAT chair was at the CCSBT. So that was one way of share knowledge and best practices as well. And I remember some of participants list has some international seabed authority representative or the chair or the head or some delegates that were attending the fishery agreement. So I recall they were there, but I don't recall from my notes or from my data any information more specific on how they were interacting, or more importantly, why. So I would need to check.
Perfect. Any other questions? Stage, Luciana.
Can you hear me? Hello, Leandra. Very nice to see you online. Congratulations on your outstanding presentation. I think I had the opportunity to read the paper that you have published few years ago about this study, and it is really outstanding. I would like to hear from you if you came across some facts, or if you have some knowledge on how these RFMOs have been dealing with scientific uncertainty and the clash of scientific evidence, and if you have come across some, well, scientific evidence or science being used for power relations in these RFMOs. Thank you.
Hi, Luciana. Yeah, that's a very good question. We are actually working on a paper, and co-author with Professor G.G. Webster and Mark Axelrod from Michigan University and Dartmouth College, where we are looking at the RFMOs and trying to see how uncertainty play a role in the decision-making process, but it's ongoing work. What I could see is that in some cases, there are two factors that need to be highlighted. One is that most of data is provided by the state members. And there are some countries, Brazil, for instance, that really fails on reporting. So the scientists need to work with the data they have it. And this data fails a lot because the countries are not reporting, and because we have the IUU fisheries, so illegal, unreported, undocumented. So the data the scientists use in some cases are really poor. So they take that uncertainty into account on their models, but still is what they have. So they work, I would say that the decision-making process is based on the best available information, but the state members should do better to provide that more accurate information to the process. So yes, there's a huge part of it that is an uncertainty. Brazil, at least, is not reporting the data since 2014, so it's very difficult.
Perfect. Thank you.
If I may just continue, because I think you didn't address scientific clash between the information provided or the evidence provided by different countries that may contradict or may clash between, not sure.
Yeah, I'm not really sure, because all these state members provide the data for the scientists, and they evaluate, and the scientific, the SC, like for ICCAT, for instance, where we can see that clear, the ICRS reports to the plenary. So when they do report, is the scientific information to the plenary. So it's really a decision among the state members if they will take it or not. And they look at the compliance documentations, enforcement, and that, of course, help them to make the decisions. I don't know if I replied what you were looking for.
Perfect. Thank you. If we don't have any questions at this stage, I'm going to ask one. So my question would be, I have many. So let's do this one first. So you already mentioned different or the same states being in different RFMOs at the same time, and also, you know, how this also leads to exchange between the different RFMOs. But did you also look into maybe the structures of how the RFMOs are, or how the institutions itself are maybe similar if the same states are in that? Because there was a quote in BBNJ which was quite interesting, because, you know, in the negotiations, it's always the talking about the organizations or the RFMOs, but it's actually the states themselves, right, that make up this RFMO. So do you see any differences or similarities depending on which countries are members? Did you do that kind of study as well?
I did. I didn't use it properly in the book. Maybe one day I will go back to that data. But I just put it very broadly and general in the book. Like you can see that CCAMLR is more constituted, or used to be more constituted by countries that were they do not have really big fishing interest. They were more on the conservation side of the process. So that is really different from ICCAT. ICCAT is more constituted with the fishing countries. They have a big economic interest in the area. So for them to follow the scientific advice, or they were more interested in fishing, they have more short-term gains than the long-term conservation process. So of course, the way our RFMOs were taking decisions, developing themselves, accepting the best practices differ based on which state was part of it. So there's a big discussion more recently that I mentioned a little bit, is that how CCAMLR is changing, because CCAMLR was born into this conservation helm, but then now the Antarctic Treaty is going to be revised. Many other countries have interest in the Antarctic area. So other countries want to be member, how they can be member. So that kind of things is really changing a little bit the way the decisions are taken. And of course, depending on each country really changes.
Interesting, yes, thank you. And if we don't have any other questions, I'm going to ask more, but feel free to post in the chat or raise your hand, or intervene if I don't see you. So maybe another question would be the interrelation between the existing RFMOs, because there's also some overlaps, as I understand, in species or areas. So how is this interplay between existing RFMOs working, and then also between RFMOs and other existing instruments, which will be very interesting also when we look into emerging ones, and maybe concerns that there might be duplications, or I want to avoid the term undermining, but there are concerns that this might be an issue to have overlaps in jurisdictions in that regard. So how do you see this already playing out in this in these activities?
Yeah, that is a great question, and very very timely for the BBNJ discussion, or even for the CDB, which is just going to be soon in December. For the agreements, for the RFMOs I studied specifically in this research, I couldn't map anything because their geographic scope was really different. So ICCAT was Atlantic, Mediterranean and South Atlantic. CCAMLR was Antarctic, and CCSBT were South Pacific. So they didn't have any overlap in area, and they didn't have any overlap in terms of species, at least the species I studied. So Patagonian toothfish was only CCAMLR. Southern Bluefin tuna was only in CCSBT and Atlantic Bluefin tuna was only in ICCAT. So they didn't overlap and they didn't interplay amongst themselves. So that was not something I could look at my data. But for the BBNJ, that is a topic I'm also follow up, and CBD specifically, we can see that. And I had an interesting chat with some Brazilian delegates recently, and we were talking about this, how the state members are complaining about undermining or overlaps among agreement that they don't want to. But if we get lessons from the literature on international relations or environmental management, environmental politics, all this interplay among agreements, it really helps to straighten their decisions, to change knowledge, to integrate the management of species, because the world is connected, the ocean is connected, the biodiversity that navigate across the oceans is connected. So when they talk about undermining, I really I disagree. I think we should connect one agreement to each other, at least mention one to another, because then we can integrate better the process. And the literature says that when we have integrated policies, we straighten the decision-making process. So it would be better. So we when they talk about that, we can remember that like scientists is super related to our RFMOs, and they play a big role on bluefin tuna management. When CITES said, well, if you don't listen, if you don't follow the scientific advice and the stocks continues to decrease, I'm going to listen on my agreement. So they have an interplay. They have a relation among CITES and ICCAT. You have a relation on UNFOCCC and CCAMLR, because climate change is really impacting Antarctic. And if the state members do not recognize that, they are going to fail on the decision-making process. So sometimes I think this undermining, not undermining, overlap, it could be more see as an opportunity of engaging and interacting other than to avoid. So I don't know, that's just my personal feel.
Thank you. And yes, feel free to also jump in if you have any comments or, other experiences. Yes, and we have Roy who can comment or ask a new question.
Yeah, just very quickly, I'm dealing with a lot of coastal state delegates in particular and attending all these RFMO meetings and pushing for sustainable actions and all the rest of it. But like, to be honest with you, the BBNJ, that framing, that kind of discussion is not happening. It's not front of mind with the delegates that I'm dealing with. Maybe some of the developed state delegates feel a bit more pressure on that front, but it's not part of the normal language yet. And in a frustrating way for me, I think we need to push it more, wedge it more firmly in a way. You know what I mean? I think quite often as NGOs, we're trying to appease people too much and we're trying to be diplomatic the whole time, but it's easy to just get glossed over in that respect. And, I've been hearing, I'm sure it sounds like quite a few people pushing, for the BBNJ framing in the process here. And I don't know, we can also have more discussions, but in reality, it's not trickling through. I'm not having any delegates talk to me about it or see it as something up and coming to be concerned about. So I am dealing with developing coastal states in particular. So maybe it's different elsewhere, but let's spread that message further and I think more directly.
Perfect. Any more pressing questions, concerns, comments? I would open another box before we close, which might or might not take some time. Maybe we can talk a little bit about sustainable fishing, what that actually means, and if that is different in the different RFMOs. So what is the aim to have a sustainable use or sustainable quotas in the different RFMOs. Have you looked into this criteria, Leandra?
Yeah, I think for and that is not that I look at systematically, but my feeling from reading the reports is that for ICCAT, as we have this fishing entities more active in the discussion, they really want to keep sustainable use so they can use it for longer. And that is important. That's part of sustainable use. On the other hand, CCAMLR, there are some countries and some approaches that are more conservative. They are more conservation oriented than there. So there are some state members that don't think we should use more or promote sustainable use. It's more related to conservation. And I guess this has more to do with the orange of the agreement. So Antarctic is more a place that some agrees that is more for conservation and science. And when ICCAT was created, was really to catching fish for a longer period. So the way they see the TAC management, I guess it differs. And not that one is good and another is bad, it's just different. The interests are different.
Interesting. And maybe last question, or if anybody of you have, more comments or questions, feel free to jump in. But maybe we can also look into, you already mentioned this a little bit, how RFMOs have also adapted over time or have changed, or the newer ones are different. So where do you see maybe some innovation or some, changes or some developments in the recent times, also maybe when it comes to science policy interface?
Yeah, I think all RFMOs are really adapting and changing. Not that every change is good, but they are adapting. RFMOs, they went through these performance reviews, and some of them took really serious some of the recommendations from the performance review. So that way, like precautionary principle, for instance, was a concept that was not mentioned in ICCAT before, and now is mentioned on some of the discussions. Of course, ICCAT is quite big, so you have bycatch discussions, seabirds, turtles, bluefin tuna, swordfish. So it's a lot of species, and it really differs the interests, the countries. So I guess they are trying to adapt in some of the characteristics, but everything depends on the state members. So some of the changes are is lower than others, but I really believe they are changing and adapting themselves to the world as well. Like just as Lisa mentioned, we have climate change, oceanographic conditions are changing, so they have to adapt even the methods of taking decisions.
Nice. Roy, did you want to jump in?
But I don't know, potentially a bad statement to make. I don't know the crowd here at all. But ICCAT's a particularly interesting situation where what we have when we're dealing with the purse seine fleets in particular, the big industrial purse seine fleets, a lot of the Central American nations like Honduras that have a big interest and big agreements with developed states to fish in their Pacific waters, they essentially do the bidding for those big industry delegations in ICCAT. So it's a tricky one where they don't actually have an interest really on whether the Atlantic stock goes bang, because there's not a lot of fishing on the Caribbean side, but they outnumber the really concerned coastal states, including Brazil, within ICCAT. So it's a very interesting dynamic and one that people should be aware of going forward, I suppose.
Yes, thanks for that. I have another quick question for you, Leandra, before we close. So when you were talking about the differences and also talking about the CCSBT as one of the newest ones, how were the scientists selected in that one? So you said, as compared to the other RFMOs where it was more coming from state governments, maybe say a little bit about the selection process of this one and what is different.
They have this independent panel that is not selected by the states, but by the agreement based on their experience on the field. And for ICCAT, the scientific panel is indicated by the state members, CCAMLR as well. But for CCSBT, they have this ad hoc committee, scientific committee that they call scientific independent panel. That's quite insulated from politics because they are not representing the states, they are representing themselves as a scientists. And of course, after they provide knowledge, the knowledge goes to the scientific committee that is indicated by the state. So of course, it states still plays a role, but the fact that they have a ad hoc committee, it really it differs from the others.
I see. Interesting. Do we have any last pressing questions or comments or anything to add for Leandra before we close? I will have 1 more minute to thank Leandra and introduce what's coming next. Okay, so I'll just share my screen for another 2 minutes, and thank you already, Leandra, for this wonderful talk. I think it was really interesting, and yeah, probably also we're going to have some follow-up discussions on these things. But just to let you know that obviously this was one of the many international lectures that we have here at the University of Vienna for the political science department. So those of you interested in political science, we also have more lectures on different wide range of topics. Most of them, when it says vor Ort, that is the German for in person only, unfortunately. So we have only a few online discussions. But yeah, feel free to have a look at those, and you're more than welcome to also join. And obviously this is the ocean seminar, so we have also an upcoming ocean seminar, which is on the 30th of November. So we invited Anna-Katharina Hornich, and yeah, she's also going to be part of the lecture series, but obviously more on the ocean side, looking at field stations, research vessels, physical communication at the heart of science. So yeah, I'm looking forward to welcoming many of you again, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed the session and gonna join next time. So thanks again, Leandra, and everybody who joined in today, and hope to see you again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.